Good evening, good evening. You are the few and the brave. You ventured out after this crazy week that we've had. Hopefully roads are all clear. I hope it's that you are so excited for what you're about to learn, but I'm also very aware that it could just be that you wanted to get out of the house after the last 4 days. I don't blame you. Well, we're going to have a very fun hour, and by fun, I mean you're going to have to put your thinking caps on. So if you find thinking fun, you're going to love this. If you don't, just hang with me. So we're going to be diving right into some of the biggest ideas that are affecting our culture today and how this affects our ability to minister. You know, if you were to go to another country, you would want to make sure you understood the worldview of that country, the customs, a little bit about the language, because what you wouldn't want to do is assume that what you were saying was something that they were receiving the way that you intended. You can be saying something and they hear something completely different because it gets lost in translation. Well, all of these ideas, think of them a little bit like ingredients. Go ahead and hit that first one. So growing up in the McCoy household, I was what you might call domestically challenged. There was the time that I folded and put away the dirty laundry because I was helping. There was the time that I unloaded the dishwasher only to find out that the dishes had not been washed. And then there was the first time that I ran the dishwasher with dish soap. In my defense, dishwasher, dish soap, it didn't seem to be rocket science. I wish I could say I was 7. I was 15. I blame all the Amelia Bedelia books. But my parents made sure that I knew, knowing how domestically challenged I was, that there are certain cleaning products that just do not mix. For instance, you think about the run-of-the-mill household cleaners in your house. You might have some ammonia in the glass cleaner. You might have some bleach in the bathtub scrub, hydrogen peroxide in your counter spray. Maybe you're kind of more into the natural cleaning methods like rubbing alcohol and vinegar, and you really don't think about them very much. They're very common household items, but mix them together, and it's a combination that can be very dangerous, even toxic. The big ideas that are influencing our culture and our churches are a lot like these cleaning products in your house. They're common, so common that you don't think much about them. You may not even notice them. But when combined together, they are creating a toxic combination, something that is contaminating the air, so to speak, and forming the worldviews of those who breathe it in. And like most airborne toxins, we're often unaware of their presence until we see the effects. The millennial generation, I am in, they call me a geriatric millennial, which is terribly unflattering. But a millennial generation, they are now the largest part of our population, and they just so happen to be the least religious. In fact, they're quite suspicious of religion in general. About half of them believe you can be a good moral person and you don't even need to believe in God. Generation Z, coming right after it, they are more spiritual. That's kind of your average 20-something and maybe college student about now. And they are absorbing and creating kind of a new moral and ethical system. But they, like millennials, do not have much confidence in objective truth. So, if there's no confidence in objective truth, there's very little hope for changing the human heart with anything true. And so their only hope of true change is the redistribution of social power. And you're finding more and more Generation Z young adults being very attracted to that. If you read one book, I would recommend to you the research and expertise of a Christian philosopher named Carl Trueman. And it's Truman, like true man, with an E in the middle. And a lot of what I'm saying, I've tried to distill portions of his book called Strange New World. And that book, Strange New World, is about like this thick, but then the one that his original book was called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, and that's like this big, and that's like one of those read a few pages and set it down. So Strange New World is an excellent book to give you more of a deep dive in the things that I'm going to talk about today. Now, these ideas that are facing our church and culture, it's not going to be comprehensive. However, what I hope you'll see is that each of them are ingredients that you can identify happening in the world around us. So let's dive in. The first is post-Christianity. Post-Christianity. The term post-Christian is something that you may have heard before. More and more pastors and thinkers are talking about it, in part because it's hard to deny that we are in a post-Christian culture. But it means two things. First, unlike a generation or two ago, the prominent figures in our culture today are not identifying themselves as Christians. If they do, they tend to be more cultural Christians, and by that, I mean maybe they say a couple of Bible verses and go to church, but it doesn't change their lives. It doesn't inform their moral choices. So many of our prominent, influential people who have great prestige, many of them want nothing to do with the Christian faith, or they don't really look at the Christian teaching with much favor. They're a big fan of Jesus, who isn't, until you start talking about following Jesus. And then, all of a sudden, they're not very tolerant. So as a result, Christianity is considered outdated. It's irrelevant. Or, even worse, it's hateful. It's bigoted. Even more, some of the basic beliefs of the Christian faith are no longer part of our cultural understanding. So you think about 30 years ago, you generally would have people agree that there was such a thing as right and wrong. You might even find that most people 30 years ago would have agreed that there is an afterlife or the existence of God. 50 years ago, most people would have believed in heaven and hell. The concept of a God, a genuine, true creator God that you could know, was something people assumed or took for granted. We took for granted that they believed. Today, however, it's all flipped. It's all turned upside down. The typical person that you're going to meet who is outside the walls of your church, you can assume that they likely don't believe in an objective right or wrong. They may have their own understanding of heaven or hell or the afterlife. And if they have a belief about God, it is likely not so much informed by a religion or a religious belief system as it is about their own ideas and their own ethical framework. So for instance, from that you would get, I can't believe in a God that would send people to hell, that type of thing. Second way that we're living in a post-Christian culture, we have a society that will reject the claims of Jesus, but they still like some of his values. For instance, we live in a society that values things like equality and kindness and putting others first, unconditional love. Those are things that the value for the of the individual, so for instance, was something that is the influence of Christianity on society. But we also have a society that rejects that Jesus is Lord, that the Bible has authority over our lives and is true, and it especially rejects what the Bible says about sexual ethics. In the words of pastor and author Mark Sayers, we live in a culture that desires the kingdom but without the king. the kingdom without the king. That's a really perfect way to describe it. People don't really want the personal God of Jesus and the moral demands that he makes on our lives, but they want the effects of Christianity. The next thing that we encounter is postmodernism. And postmodernism says basically, if it works for you, then it's true for you. Have you ever encountered someone who says that? How do you share the gospel with someone who just responds with, well, that is true for you because it works for you? Or flip it works for you because it's true for you, but it isn't true for me. That might sound like a bunch of gobbledygook, but the truth is it's coming from an idea, and that idea is postmodernism. Postmodernism claims that there is no such thing as objective truth, and that reality is just kind of made up stories that cultures tell themselves to create some type of moral belief system. So truth is not some type of objective reality that we discover, but it's an inner experience that we can create. So social values, moral codes, religion, these are all considered the products of faulty human beings. A postmodernist may believe that God actually exists. They just don't believe that we have the ability to really know him or be certain of his character. At the real ground of it, it isn't just a rejection of objective truth. It's the idea that how can we possibly know? How can we within ourselves possibly know everything that there is to know about truth, and we can grasp it? It's something that it's like crippling doubt in the ability of humanity to even understand or access truth. Therefore, all religions are just people's opinions, products of their culture. No religion is more or less true than any other, and if someone is claiming that they have exclusive truth, well, then what they're really trying to do is gain power over you. So your Christian faith may work for you or be true for you, but to claim that it's universally true for everybody, that's considered arrogant or unjust. As a result, then, you can imagine right and wrong is also relative. Society's moral standards just reflect that society. So what's right in our American culture might have been wrong 5,000 years ago in a different culture. When a person or worldview makes an objective claim like Jesus is Lord, humanity are all sinners in need of salvation, the line has been crossed. Because that statement doesn't reflect your feelings or your experience. That statement is reflecting a universal truth, a universal moral idea that means something for how we have to live. And if you are believing something that would impose a morality on someone else, well, now you're saying right and wrong do exist, and that is the unforgivable sin. You can imagine how challenging it is for many of our evangelism methods of the last 20 to 30 years. The 2 diagnostic questions and 4 spiritual laws are not going to get you very far in a culture like postmodernism and post-Christianity. In a way, much of what we have to do in ministry today, it is a slow, arduous process, similar to if you had a garden and you were going to give water and miracle grow to that garden, but that garden is all covered with weeds and sticks and all kinds of things preventing and obstructing the light and the water and the nutrients from getting to it. We have to clear away those weeds. And those weeds have deep roots. It's going to take not only patience from God's people to interact with other people at a relational level, but it's also going to mean that you and I have to be students of our culture. Because if we're not students of our culture, we're just going to be speaking a different language. And it's going to get lost in translation. Let's go to the next one. This one's a bit of a mouthful. And you may not have heard of it before, but once you learn what it is, you're going to see it everywhere. It's called expressive individualism. Expressive individualism, by the way, if you watched Disney movies growing up, you absorbed expressive individualism before you could even pronounce it. Expressive individualism says that the inner you, that's the real you. That's the authentic you. And the authentic, real you, that holds the key to your happiness and your true fulfillment. So how do you access that? Well, you have to be able to express yourself, define yourself. In fact, that is the pinnacle of what it means to be a fulfilled human being. Your best self, your highest good is being fully authentic and true to who you really are. If you've noticed that people under 30 talk about authenticity, speaking your truth, things like that, much of this is going back to this idea of expressive individualism. Now, how do you access the real you? It's your feelings. It's your emotions. In fact, your feelings and emotions are what you should trust to guide your actions. Your true self is something that you have to uncover, and you have to have the courage to live it out or express it. This affects how people view things like responsibility, family, society and community, work. Anything that would get in the way of your self-expression, like tradition or religion, well, that is invalid because it's trying to get in the way of that true, authentic you. The way we see expressive individualism worked out is in ideas like no one gets to tell you who you truly are. No one gets to limit you of who you really are. Only you get to decide that for yourself. Now, there are aspects of individualism that are very good. In fact, the value for an individual as an individual goes back to Christianity. When Christianity was introduced to the Roman world, to ancient Greek culture, ancient Greco-Roman world valued a person according to their social status. So it had a system, it had a hierarchy of who was considered a person and who was just considered a legal non-person. But Christianity changed all of that and gave every human being, on the basis of that person being created in God's image, equal dignity, value, and worth, no matter where they fell in the social sphere. So not everything about individualism is bad. But what expressive individualism says is that you have to unlock truth from within yourself, and anyone or anything that gets in the way is an opponent. It is an enemy to your authenticity. The next one, distrust of society. This idea says that what we really need to do to unlock our true selves is escape every other influence. Social expectations are the problem because, see, the issue of the human condition is not that the human heart is corrupt, it's that society is corrupt, and society makes us corrupt. So what do we need to do? Escape society. Withdraw from society. This idea comes from a French philosopher named Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau is considered the founder of an idea called Romanticism. Romanticism runs all through Western culture. And his goal was to try to find his inner self and be everything that he was, his true authentic self in every circumstance of life. He believed that people were actually good, that human nature was good, and it was free, and it was independent. But society was what was wrong with humanity. Society shaped people to make them fit some type of inauthentic life. All these social expectations like rules and religion and family was getting in the way of people being their true natural selves. So your true natural self that you have to unlock so that you can have an authentic existence and be truly fulfilled, that happens when you rebel against society's expectations. Like most worldviews, he's got a grain of truth. We are affected by our society. We are affected by our environment. In fact, cultures create patterns of sin that influence the next generation with those patterns of sin. But Rousseau misdiagnosed the human problem. We are not naturally good, 1 John 1:8 tells us. Our hearts cannot save us from a corrupt society. Our hearts are what the actions come from that contribute to a corrupt society. So society may influence us, but it's all made up of individuals who have moral responsibility for their own choices. One of the ways that we see Rousseau's ideas playing out quite a bit is in the issue of gender identity. Gender identity. And it's not just gender now. There's actually a whole category of gender that claims it claims that even categories of humanity are not enough to understand their gender identity, and they look to identify with animals, especially cats. There's something called cat gender. I'm not making this up. Plants. There are some people who are so deceived by not just ideas in our culture, but really very demonic forces, I believe, that are harming the image of God, not only to try to alter their bodies, but to believe that they'd be better off not even human. One of the ways that we see this at work, especially, is trying to when children, and by children I'm talking middle school, high school, try to identify and diagnose their own teen angst as believing that they must have been born in the wrong body, that they are a female, but in their heart they believe themselves to be a boy. How in the world did we have a society that in the last 15, 20 years went from saying, well, that person needs psychiatric care, to saying, well, now we need to help this person fully transition to living as a boy? It came because of gradual acceptance of these ideas. That society is the problem. Society is trying to mold this child into a particular life that harmonizes with being female. But this child knows who they really are at 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. This child understands that he or she is actually not a male or female, but someone of the opposite gender. And so what happens? We have parents believing that they are doing something good, taking their children to doctors, getting them put on medications like puberty blockers, eventually being injected with cross-sex hormones, and then after that, getting surgeries to either amputate healthy organs or synthetically create other sexual organs of the opposite gender. All of it comes from these ideas, and these are philosophies that have taken our world captive. The truth that we live by the will of a creator God who made us male or female is now a very radical statement in our culture, because it is going against whole philosophies that appeal to how we can know something. Well, we can know something because the physical world is real. The physical world is something God created, and everything God creates is good. It also goes against the idea that truth is not a subjective experience. It's something that is outside of us that we can either rebel against or accept. it goes against the idea that your true fulfillment is not found in following your feelings, but being in right relationship with the God who created you and living according to his design. And it goes against the idea that you are some type of good guide. Your emotions, your changing feelings are a trustworthy guide for how you should live. These things are deeply rooted weeds that we have to patiently help people pull up. I'd like to say that we're seeing the tide turn a little bit. I think some people are just becoming outraged enough that they say, this is insane. We don't want to have this in our schools and our families. But much of what we're encountering is a system that is running full force in this direction because of these ideas and the others that we'll talk about. Gender happens to be where it's kind of all mixed together like this big soup. And what we're seeing is the product of all of these ideas together. The next one is suspicion of structures. This says that everything in the world is all about power. Friedrich Nietzsche, you may have heard of the philosopher Nietzsche. He shocked the world by declaring God is dead. Perhaps you heard about that. And he proposed a new way to think about morality. Just don't think about it at all, because it doesn't really exist. He claimed that all morality was just a manipulative tool. It was just something to gain control over the weak. It's something that religious people used to have power over other people. So what he said was actually kind of logical. He said, well, if God doesn't exist, then moral restraints don't exist. Should and should not doesn't exist. Moral authority doesn't exist either. Therefore, people should get rid of anything that might try to restrain them, like religion. So they can be as free and as unhindered as they want to be in their lives. Now, this idea that religion is a tool of exploitation and that everything is about power also comes from the philosophy of Karl Marx. Karl Marx, if you're wondering kind of how Marx ties into all of this, just hang with me. Marx was a materialist, meaning he didn't believe in the existence of God. And anything that appealed to a objective right or wrong, he didn't believe in any of that either. Instead, everything in the world boiled down to political conflict. And at the core of all that conflict was control over money. So the social class that controlled the economy exploited the social class that did all the work. But that class that did all the work, all those people, they had one psychological comfort. One thing that would ease their inner pain. Any guess what that was? Religion. So for Marx, religion wasn't about moral standards. It was just about helping the exploited working class feel like their conditions were not so bad. And this is why he called it religion, the opiate of the people. That was how he got there. That's not all. He also took issue with the family. And we see this happening in society as well. A man who co-wrote the Communist Manifesto with him, they believed that the family, the nuclear family, mother, father, children, was all about helping the ruling class keep their power. Wives and children were just slaves to the capitalists. So, according to Marx and thinkers like him, if a true revolution were to take place, it would diminish the differences between men and women, and it would get rid of marriage from a perspective of the woman being economically under the control of her husband. The key to social equality, therefore, was to get rid of the family. Now, these ideas did not die with 19th century German philosophers. In fact, they expanded. Just a few years ago, in 2019, there was something called the National Socialism Conference. It took place on July 4th. And the tagline of this conference was no borders, no bosses, no binaries. The idea being that there's a connection between overthrowing capitalism, statehood, and then also that binary being the binary of male and female. All of this dovetails into calls that they had to abolish the family, to get rid of capitalism. One talked about pregnancy as a tool of oppression, and that we need economic and social justice. This is why, especially for whether you're talking about gender or any other type of true critical theory, and I'm talking like critical theory, some people throw that around and they use it kind of as a verbal weapon. I'm talking true, genuine critical theory. Most of them will acknowledge their affinity for Marx and his ideas, if they're being honest. And let's take a step back and look at what their goals are. Their goals are to try to create a just and equal society. But they're trying to do it completely without God and any type of moral responsibility to him. Let's go ahead and do the next one. Identity and intersectionality. Let me go over this really quickly. So identity politics has taken over our world, and you have likely seen that. And it wasn't just the 2016 election that changed us as a society. We had been getting there for a while. Identity politics, in many ways, has taken the place of family. There's a woman named Mary Eberstadt who wrote a book called Primal Screams, and her whole thesis was that people don't have family ties, and so they're replacing that with political ties. And so when people talk about their political identity or the issues that they care very passionately about, there's this almost visceral reaction to anyone who disagrees with them, to the point that you can't have a logical conversation with someone about an idea or a policy. And you're going, why in the world can people not just calmly talk about their differences? Well, that's because we are living in a world where your identity is wrapped up in your politics now. It has replaced other foundational sources of identity like family and religion. In other words, politics has become the new religion. Intersectionality is something that gets a little complex, so I want to try to give a clear but simple understanding of it. So intersectionality claims that, whoops, let me find it. Sorry, lost my place. Intersectionality claims that people are oppressed in the world according to how many different types of minority status they represent. So for instance, someone who is an ethnic minority and physically disabled, or someone who is a sexual minority, so LGBTQ, and an immigrant, that when you put those two together, that person is even more on the margins, more of an outcast compared to the norm that society expects. Now, there's a descriptive aspect and a prescriptive aspect. The descriptive aspect is something that we can look at and say, yes, we do see evidence that different people, according to their ethnicities in this country, have different experiences. I am always grateful to hear from my African American brothers and sisters about how they feel if they were to be pulled over, and to recognize that I have never felt that. That is a descriptive aspect of intersectionality. But here's where it goes too far. The prescriptive aspect says that the more someone is on the margins, the more pure their perspective is, the more true their opinions are. So what we have to do, if we want to have an equal society, is listen to them more or decenter the majority. Have you heard that phrase? Decenter the majority and bring other people's minority perspectives to the forefront. The trouble with that is if you believe that truth is objective, and I'm not talking about listening to people's experiences and feelings, I'm talking about how we understand what is true and how to fix what is wrong, then what the prescriptive part of intersectionality says is that truth is not objective right and wrong. Truth is something that we have to learn from the experiences of someone else. Does that make sense? Go like this if it does. Okay, great. Let's do the next one. Y'all are doing so great. You're hanging with me with all these terms. SOGI equals self. Has anybody heard of that term, SOGI? SOGI laws, SOGI policy. SOGI stands for sexual orientation and gender identity. Sexual orientation and gender identity, it now equals your true self. So your sexual identity is now your true identity. I want to give just a bit of a trigger warning. This section contains some references to sexual abuse, and I just want you to be able to make space for that before you hear it. One of the things that was a shift in our culture is that with the ideas of Sigmund Freud, sex was no longer something that you did, it was someone that you are. And that the sexual drive is the primary force of all human behavior. And that any type of sexual pleasure is central to being human and fulfilled. So to deny any impulse would be repressive and the root of chronic neurological illnesses like anxiety and depression. But if you follow all of your impulses, you will be happy and healthy and a fulfilled human being. The problem is society's moral codes make you feel like a bad person because you don't follow all of your impulses. Well, fast forward, Freud's research has been largely debunked. Most serious thinkers recognize that he was nuts. That is not the clinical term for it. It's not even the theological term for it, but it's pretty good. But that did not stop him from having influence. He had significant influence with researchers like Alfred Kinsey. Now, Alfred Kinsey is still hailed and valorized in the sociological world. And this is not the Kinsey that Hollywood wants you to know about. There's been a movie made about him. There's a very sanitized version about Kinsey out there. But Kinsey was a zoologist, which is quite fitting because he believed that human beings were really little more than animals. And he normalized the belief that sex was just a biological urge and that whatever form it takes is totally valid, including with children. His book, Sexual Behavior and the Human Male, claimed that sex acts with young children did not constitute rape. And that despite children objecting and hundreds of women describing childhood sexual abuse and its effects, Kinsey claimed there was no lasting damage. This was not just in the silos of academia either. In 1949, Kinsey testified before the California legislators that the state should lessen penalties for suspected child molesters because society is just getting all worked up and hysteric about all of this. His research, quote unquote, is being used still to normalize the sexualization of children. You may have heard of a phrase. You'll see the acronym MAP. I remember I had to look up, what does MAP mean? Well, it means minor attracted persons. In other words, the word pedophilia is out of fashion, too judgmental. Change the word, change the perception. Now people talk about minor attracted persons, and this is a increasingly vocal community that is demanding equal recognition for their sexual proclivities. Have you seen things like Drag Queen Story Hour? of children being watching these vile and perverse performances. And parents will take them there and just say, this is totally normal. The sexualization of children, the introduction of sexual ideas to children is being introduced at earlier and earlier ages, as is, by the way, ideas of transgender and gender identity. That's happening in grade school now. And it goes back to this idea that your true fulfilled self is your sexually uninhibited self, that this is the key to how we will be true fulfilled human beings. So just imagine how foreign and foolish it is to hear that a Christian sexual ethic is chastity until marriage between a man who is a male and a woman who is a female for life, and that any expression or even desire for sexual activity outside of that covenant union is sin and is not God's design for humanity. We are truly speaking a different language. There are also, however, another aspect that makes this challenging for us having an impact is there is no shortage of people who claim to be ministering under the name of Christ, who give a safe harbor to the LGBTQ community. And when I say safe harbor, I mean not the safety to come and wrestle or to come and heal, to come and walk with them towards repentance, but to say, oh, this Christian sexual ethic that people are saying is the one right way to live, that is all just a cultural expression. Paul didn't really mean that. Jesus didn't really mean that. And even if they did, the Bible's corrupt and you can't trust it anyway. The average teenager or college student who might be researching these things will find many different answers, all under the banner of Christianity. Next one is the politicization of sex. This has the idea that the role of the state is to protect people's sexual identities. I'll kind of give you just a gloss over of this. It comes from a thinker who claimed that we had to have sex education happening in schools, and that had to be mandatory, and it had to sexually liberate children away from the ideas and beliefs of their parents. Because parents might be trying to mold their children to a particular way of morality, and that was just oppressive. And we had to abolish social codes or abolish sexual codes, and children would be free to express themselves however they wanted to. So the child's sexual and political freedom is something that the government is responsible to protect, even if it means coercing or punishing families that disagree. Where are we seeing that? California. There also the father who lost custody of his son right here in Texas because he objected to his son being transitioned to live as a girl, and his mother moved to California. Where we're also seeing this is parents are losing the parental rights in the court system if they object to certain treatment options, for instance, with gender identity. One girl was, her parents lost custody of her, and she was placed with her grandparents. In Canada, a father objected to his daughter, I think it was his daughter, taking testosterone shots, and he was put in jail. Go ahead to the next slide. All of these things make the church, the message of Christianity, a counter idea to every one of the ideas that we've discussed. These beliefs about human nature have deep roots. And gone are the days when we can afford to be students of our culture. And you can go ahead and just put up everything that's on that slide. So one thing is that Christianity gives us a common identity. And this identity forms how we understand who we are to God, to each other, and within ourselves. So much of what people are wrestling with today, these ideas that they don't even realize they're being affected by, go back to identity and how do we form it? What does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be a fulfilled human being? These are deep philosophical questions. They are profound worldview questions, because wrapped up in that is, well, what's keeping me from being a healthy, fulfilled human being? Well, that leads to the question of what's wrong with humanity. And once you get to what's wrong with humanity, you move to how do we fix it? What is redemption? And these are the classic worldview categories of creation, fall, and redemption. Christianity also gives us a common experience. And so when you look at the world in terms of its affinity for identity politics, intersectionality, these things that we're using in our society to try to understand how do we create a good and just and moral world, they all fall back on experience, an individual's experience. Well, Christianity counters all of that and says that our identity is rooted in a common experience. If you are in Christ, then no matter what your conversion was like or when it was, you had a common experience of repentance and faith and the indwelling, regenerating of the Holy Spirit. That's a common experience and a common identity. And then finally, a common mission. So much of what we see in the ideas happening in the world today, it's no wonder and it's no accident that millennials and Generation Z, young adults, are looking for some type of cause to grasp onto. There's this hunger to change the world and make it better. That is a good and beautiful thing. They are looking for a sense of mission. And all throughout the history of our Christian faith, wherever you saw Christians influence the society, part of their mission was to improve the conditions of every person, no matter what that person, what their place was in society. Things like healthcare and literacy, pro-life work, overturning forced abortion in societies. That's just a few. People are looking for that sense of common mission, to be swept up in something where they have a genuine place in it, but it is bigger than themselves. I hope that after tonight, after your brain's able to calm down from hearing all of these phrases, that you will consider how you see each of these ideas at work in society. Go read the news. Go peruse social media. Go on Twitter if you dare. And just look for these ideas at work. You will see them. You will find them because they are in the air. They are the toxic combinations that are affecting all of us, whether or not we realize it. And these are the ideas that the people that you encounter in your community are ingesting and absorbing and expressing. You don't have to be in a liberal city like New York or LA to find these ideas at work. They are truly everywhere. I hope that you will become a student of your culture and that you will embrace the call not only to love the Lord with all your mind, but to become the philosopher that God intends his own children to be. Thank you very much.